back to this week's episode of Seeking Proof, Finding Grace. I'm your host, Ron Campbell, and this week, as with every week, I want to start off by reminding you of the most important truth in the entire universe. God loves you, and He doesn't just love you a little. He loves you so much that He gave everything for you. And it's always so important to remember that, how loved you are and how special you are. We're going to talk a little bit more about how special this little blue planet of ours is. And remember, we've been walking our way from the Big Bang up to Earth itself. And we've been asking the question, how many events along the way did it take to get our little planet right exactly where it needed to be? Not only to just support life a little, but to be able to support life for a long period of time to bring us to where we are today. And as we've approached this, we've seen a couple of different things. We've seen little tiny miracles along the way that you can look at and say, well, realistically, again, remember the idea of the multiverse or just naturalistic theory is, look, somebody had to get lucky. We were the lucky ones. That explains it. We're here. We're alive. Therefore, the anthropic principle tells us that it's obviously possible and we don't need to look any further. Nothing to see here. We can just move on. And for some of these things, I think that's true. But as you continue to pile them one on top of another, how likely does that really seem? You know, as we address this question, let's say you're playing poker with somebody and they win 9 or 10 hands in a row. It's possible. I mean, yeah, realistically it's possible. And maybe it's the game is close and you kind of look at it and go, anything could happen. And I don't think the other person is cheating. But then on the 10th hand, they get a royal flush. And you go, well, that seems really unlikely. And then on the 11th hand, they win again, it's close, 12th hand. And then about the 13th or 14th hand, they get 4 aces. And you look at it and go, okay, wait a minute. This is like 15, 20 hands in a row that they've won here. At what point do you throw up your hands and say, yeah, that's not right, something's going on? And that's what we're talking about here as we look at this. Remember, the first 9 or 10 miracles along the way, these little stops of all these things that had to be right. The right type of galaxy, the right age of the galaxy, all the right elements coming together. Obviously, there can be some coincidences and those things can happen. But then we hit this idea that at some point in time, our solar system began at just the perfect spot in the galaxy, that bright and shining center where it could gather up all of the materials that it needed for us. And that's a great place to be at that galactic store where you need to get all those goodies. But it's a terrible place for life to live and survive. And so at some point, our little solar system moved from the bright and shining center of the galaxy all the way out to the Orion Arm where we find ourselves today. It stopped in just the perfect spot, in just the perfect place, having gotten everything that it needed for life. And now we find ourselves moved into the perfect spot for life to exist for the long term. And that's one of those things that you kind of look at and scratch your head and go, well, that seems really unlikely. I mean, obviously it happened, but it does feel like there was maybe a guiding hand there. But maybe you go on and then we look at the things that we talked about last week with Newton's dilemma. And this is exactly the point that Newton was getting at. We recognize that gravity is what holds the planets in their orbits around the sun. We recognize that. But there's no way that they got there in the first place just by gravity. Gravity explains why they're still there now, but gravity doesn't remotely explain how they got there in the first place. And we talked last week about the intricate movements of Jupiter and Saturn and how everything fell into place to give us this one little planet that we happen to be sitting on that is perfectly suited and situated for life. Next week, we're going to talk about our sun, but this week, we're going to take just a little tiny step back from where we ended last week, and we're going to look at something that is even more remarkably unlikely than the orbits of the planets and everything else. And we're going to talk about the formation of our moon and how we ended up with the moon that we have. We just had an eclipse the other day, and we were able to see, I think, about 90% or so of it from where we live. And it's an amazing thing to watch. It's an incredible event to see here on Earth. The scientific discoveries that we've gleaned from eclipses and things like that is just unparalleled. And it's genuinely entertaining from our perspective. But what's so unique about it, there are so many things that we often miss. Our moon is abnormally large for a planet our size. And its location is not ordinary of where you would expect it to be. It's far closer and far bigger than it should be. And scientists have studied for years this question, how did we get the moon that we have? How did we get so lucky? And again, talking about luck. How were we so fortunate to get the moon that we have? And that's what we're going to look at. I mean, is as far as we go in this was, the movement of the solar system seems remarkably unlikely. And all of those other things had to line up just right. And the 6 or 7 things we talked about last week with the planets orbiting, if you add all of those together, they kind of equal another deal breaker. But what we have in our moon rivals what we saw last week, if not dramatically so. So scientists believe that our moon was formed by a collision between another planet and the early Earth as Earth was forming. And the list of things that have to go together correctly for this to work is beyond comprehension. Remember, in any aspect of your life, can you think of a situation where a collision results in something positive? I'll give you a moment to think about that, but in everything that I can think of, when you have a collision, the result is always bad. And when you have 2 planets coming together, every Hollywood movie that I've ever seen leads me to believe that that's going to be really bad, that's going to be the disaster movie to end all disaster movies. There's no fixing it, there's no escaping it. Even Bruce Willis and the whole crew of guys are not going to get up there like in Armageddon and fix that one. If a whole planet is coming at Earth, we're in a whole lot of trouble. And yet that's what scientists believe happened. So what you're going to have is a situation where 2 planets collide. Number one, early enough in their existence to exchange all of the things that they're going to exchange. We'll talk about that in a second. Number 2, they're going to have to hit in just the right way that both planets, or at least one of them, is not completely destroyed. It's going to have to be at just the right time in their development because, let's be honest, while this might have been beneficial for an early Earth, if this happens a week from Thursday, it's a bad thing, and it's game over for all of us. So all of this has to happen just right. It's got to be at the right angle, the right speed, the right time, just the right elements for both of them, and we're going to talk about why that's important in just a minute. But what we end up and are left with after this collision is an Earth that is dramatically well prepared to support life in the long run, and a moon that is going to help out along the way. And what ought to jump out at everybody is that doesn't seem like that could happen by chance. And if you say, well, now wait a minute, things happen. Again, accidents happen and somebody could have just gotten lucky. Well, we've used that when it came to the movement of the solar system, and we used that when it came to the orbit of the planets. And now we're going to pull that card and play it again when it comes to the formation of our moon. It feels like we're way down the path of that excuse starting to wear very thin. Luck explains everything, does not explain everything. It doesn't in the real world, and it certainly doesn't here. So let's talk about the first thing that the moon's impact did. Number one, it slowed our orbit, which seems remarkable. There's a lot of things it could have done. If you've ever played pool, 2 balls smacking into each other, they both go flying off in different directions. That didn't happen. Our orbit stayed fine, but our rotation slowed. And we need our rotation to be slowed down because our Earth's rotation is tremendously beneficial to support life on our planet. So number one, the moon's creation slowed the Earth's rotation down to just the perfect level at just the perfect time to support long-term development of life here on Earth. Remember, if it takes significantly longer, well, then we have a sun that's not in the same good situation that we need the sun to be producing the right radiation to support life here on Earth. So number one, our planet's rotation, tremendously helped by this. Number two, our planet's rotational axis and tilt. You know, the nice thing is, living where I live in the Midwest, we get to experience all the seasons. We have a nice spring. I love the fall. Fall is amazing, my favorite time of the year. We get winter, we get summer, we get all the seasons. Well, why do we get that? Because of that wonderful moon that we have orbiting up above us. The moon's presence and size stabilizes our tilt and axis. And that is so tremendously beneficial for life here on Earth. It gives us our seasons. It occurs at just the right frequency and way so that we get nice long seasons, but not too long, not too short. Again, just right to support life here on Earth across the entire planet. What you don't want is for the sun to be focused in on one spot all the time, because then what you get is ice on one end, ice on the other, and a nice warm spot in the middle that probably eventually becomes too warm and doesn't support life terribly well. You want a nice rotation, and we have something that is just perfect for life here on Earth. Now, the next group of items are going to seem a little bit less realistic along the way. You say, well, okay, but the impact, if it was just right, could have done all of those things. Well, the impact did some other things that seem rather remarkable. You see, the early Earth, scientists believe, had too much water and just the atmosphere wasn't right for life. There were too many reasons that early Earth, before the impact, would not have been a great host planet to support life. But the moon's impact took care of that. When the moon impacts Earth, we lose an enormous amount of our water, and the atmosphere is thinned tremendously. Just to the perfect levels. Now granted, remember we need a little bit later on, and we talked about last week how there was that late bombardment of things that brought certain essential elements that we needed back to the planet at just the right time. But this intricate exchange of the water and atmosphere that we lost and the things that we got later in the late heavy bombardment maximalizes the potential for long-term life here on Earth. And isn't it amazing we got that from a massive collision from another planet? So we get this extraordinary exchange that helps support life here on our planet. The water that we need and the atmosphere that we need. But that's not all. It sounds like one of those TV commercials. But wait, there's more. You also end up getting the perfect combination of things that we need in the interior of our planet. And I mean from top to bottom. Starting with the core, we get from this collision an enormous amount more of iron and those heavy metals and things that we need in the core of our planet to produce the electromagnetic field around our planet that protects life from harmful radiation coming in from space. We get that from all of the things that we got during the collision with this body that formed the moon. And if the timing hadn't been just right, we couldn't have gotten all of those heavy elements all the way down into the core and throughout the rest of the mantle. If the Earth is too far developed, if it's hard and stabilized and the two planets come into each other, it's going to be like the pool ball example that I gave earlier. The two planets are going to bounce off each other, and they're not going to bounce, they're going to crash off each other. And the impact is not going to be nearly as productive. So the benefits that the core got were tremendous for being able to produce the electromagnetic field that we need to support life. The impact also infuses not just the core, but the mantle and the other interior parts of the Earth itself with the radioactive isotopes and the other elements that we need to support plate tectonics and the other things that stabilize our planet. You know, we don't oftentimes think of volcanoes and the little earthquakes and things that we have as good things. They actually are. There could be much larger, worse alternatives. We got just the right number of radioactive isotopes and all of these other heavy metals injected into the planet, again, at just the right time, to stabilize our planet, gives us a little bit more heat coming up from the Earth below us, gives us those things that we need so that we have nice, stable plate tectonics and a nice, stable planet that, again, is perfectly suited for supporting life in the long run. We also gained the things that we needed for life in the outer portions of the planet, the crust itself, to again support the long-term development of life. Some of that falls in that same category with plate tectonics and things like that, but others are the elements that we need for plant life and animal life, life in the oceans and things like that, the nutrients and the things that they need to be able to support, again, long-term life here on Earth. We also have, if you take one step further, the atmospheric conditions that we need. Those elements are now there. Those things are there that we need. A thinner atmosphere, an atmosphere that works better for creatures that breathe with lungs, things like that. All of those things that we need to center around the long-term sustainability of life. And I know some of you may be saying, well, no, wait a minute, that's just the life that developed here on the planet. And for some of those things, that is actually true as you look at the question of how thick the atmosphere is and things like that. But remember, it rests on a razor's edge. And while it could be a little thinner or a little thicker, as you tweak things like that, it gets back into this question of fine-tuning. As you tweak things like that, there are pros and cons. There are things that you gain and things that you lose. And what we find is that what we have is remarkably well suited and fine-tuned for life. So as you start pulling all these things together, and lest we forget, I think the other thing I was also going to walk away from there, as I mentioned before, we just got this solar eclipse, we just had this eclipse, and it's amazing and it's fantastic when we can see those things, but the scientific discoveries that we've made during this period of time where we have a moon that is perfectly situated and perfectly sized to be able to produce these events, the scientific discoveries that we've made have leapt us forward tremendously understanding the universe around us. If you go back all those episodes ago talking about Einstein and his general theory of relativity, during an eclipse, a great portion of that was actually proved looking at the gravitational effect that bodies have on light coming around them. Eddington, who actually during an eclipse was able to observe those things and help prove Einstein's theory. It looks a great deal like the guiding hand of intelligence that built this all around us and put us in this amazing situation, not only so that we would have conditions favorable for life, but so that perhaps we might also discover that guiding hand of intelligence bringing us along the way. Now, again, you can look at some of these pieces and say, well, some of that's a coincidence and maybe it just happened. But the impact of the moon having this tremendous effect on us goes far beyond just random luck and chance. And again, maybe you could say, well, one of these things. Okay, maybe one of those things. It's ridiculously unlikely, but maybe one remarkably unlikely thing happens. But the movement of the solar system, the orbits of the planets, as Newton noted, and now the impact of the moon, we have 3 deal breakers, each one of them on their own remarkably unlikely to a point where you have to look at it and say that the odds of that happening are just too slim. And all of the other ones that we've piled up getting here keep building up more and more and more. And next week, I hate to tell you, when we get to our little shining sun up there, we're going to find another one where we just happen to be in the picture perfect spot. We always talk about sweet spots or Goldilocks zones or things like that. Next week we find out exactly how big Goldilocks really is. So I want to thank you for joining us again this week and give everybody a chance to maybe catch their breath and think about this for a minute. How many of these little miracles along the way, and as they start to add up and stack one on top of the other, how many are too many? How many before we look at it and say, the guy dealing the cards has shown his hand? Nobody wins that many hands of poker all in a row without some shenanigans going on behind the scenes. And you don't reach this many coincidences, all of them so incredibly favorable to our existence, without somebody behind the scenes pulling the strings. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you did, I hope you'll hit that like button for the episode and the subscribe button for our channel. You can find our episodes on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify, and you can reach us at prooftograce@yahoo.com on our email address, and you can find us on our website at prooftograce.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this week you'll take a moment to not only to consider these things, but maybe just consider for a moment how much God loves you and the care and attention that He put into everything for the opportunity to share that love with you. Thank you so much and have a great week. Bye-bye.